No? Yeah. Oh, there we go. Oh, man. It's good to see the few of you. You know what? I was just sitting back and I was trying to think, okay, what on earth happened? What a difference a week makes. Of course, it's me. I'm preaching, so that you guys probably decided. People just said, oh, man, it's not Nick. It's not Andrew, so we'll just stay home. But I got to thinking, it's the beginning of spring break. And then look at outside. It's gorgeous. We just got through with, I don't know, like 145,000 days of rain, right? I mean, that's the way it felt. And then on top of that, Gonzaga's playing and Oregon's playing. You guys want to know whether or not Gonzaga won? Yeah. I can't tell you. I've already had people tell me, please don't say anything because I'm recording it, so I can't say anything. Nobody else say anything. Just you. Shh. Let's not depress people or make them overly excited because then they'll leave. And anyway, I'm glad you're here today. Today we're starting a new series entitled 3 Days That Changed Everything. And I'm really excited about this. We're going to take a look at what I believe to be 3 of the most important days in all of history. And we're going to start with, that fateful Friday, the day that Jesus was crucified, and then we're going to go through to Easter Sunday. So it's just going to be kind of a real quick study in the end of Jesus' life, and that'll be fantastic. But here's how I want to do this. Just for a moment, if you would do me a favor, and I want everybody just to kind of settle down. Let me see if I can get I'm going to try to see if I can actually time myself, and that it probably won't help. But here's what I want us to do. I want you guys just to kind of settle down, shake some things off. I want you to close your eyes. I want you to breathe deep. Let it out. I want you to feel your feet on the ground. I want you to settle down. And you're there. You're on the hill. You look up, you see Jesus. He's hanging on the cross with 2 others, one on each side of him. His knees are about the same height of your eyes. You look up and you see his face, and blood begins to trickle from his forehead, down his forehead and down his cheeks. And it makes its way through his beard. It makes its way down to his chin. It kind of pools up there at the chin, and then 1 drop is released. You watch it as it falls. The wind takes it just a little bit to the left. It lands on the dirt. You look at Jesus, he's a bloody mess. He has gaping lacerations all over his back, his arms, his chest. You can look in and you can see muscle and you can see flesh. He's humiliated. He's naked. He's exhausted physically and mentally. Crucifixion is the worst of all deaths that they could ever come up with. You either die of shock or you die of asphyxiation. Trying your hardest just for each breath, just gasping for that breath, holding on to it as much as you can before you let it back out and you go for one more. You look to the right, you look to the left, you look around looking for his disciples, but you only see a few. As a matter of fact, there's just a few women there and one man, John. Most of them ran, most of them are hiding. The religious leaders are there, though, and they begin to hurl insults. He saved others, but he can't save himself. If you're God's son, come down from the cross. One of those that are on the cross look over at Jesus and give him an insult, and the other begs for mercy. And then out of nowhere, darkness rolls in, and it stays for 3 hours. You look, you try to decipher, to discern what it is that you're seeing, but really all you can see are shadowy figures. You hear the shuffling of feet, the crying of women, the labored breath of those on the cross. There's a heaviness on the hill. It smells of dirt and sweat and death. Then Jesus speaks. Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. Mark translates that and says, it's my God, why have you forsaken me? Okay, I want you to look back up here. Why did he have to die? And such a cruel death, right? I mean, to ask the question, why did he have to die that everybody dies, Lance. And some people are taken away from us early, and some people have long lives. What do you mean, why did he have to die? But why did he have to die this kind of death? This cruel and unusual and horrific death. This is Jesus. This is the one who calms the storm. This is the one who heals the lame and the blind and the sick. He raises the dead. He forgives sinners. He feeds the multitudes. He cares for the poor. He touches lepers. Nobody touches lepers. But Jesus touched lepers. He champions those who are the least. He welcomes the outcast. Why did he have to die? About this time of the year, every year, magazines begin to produce, they begin to put on their cover some sort of picture of Jesus or some sort of picture of some sort of event that happened around the death of Jesus. And in there's always an article that's written. And it's interesting because if you'll pick up some of those magazines, maybe it'll be Time, maybe it'll be Newsweek or Life, and they're telling a little bit of the story of what's happening and what happened in the midst of Jesus' death. But it's interesting because as you take a look at it, some of them take the angle and say that Jesus was divine. And some of them take the angle and say that he was a prophet, that he came from God, and that he wasn't God, but yet he was a prophet who came from God. And others say, no, he was a prophet, but he performed miracles and things as such. And then there are others that say, no, he wasn't divine at all. He was just a good teacher. He taught things like turn the other cheek and love your neighbor and love your enemy and go with somebody a second mile. Why would you kill somebody like that? Why would you nail them to the cross? Why did he have to die that way? Let's turn back time just a little bit, because maybe the story, this is at the end of Friday, right? This was at the close of the day as the sun was preparing to go down, and Jesus breathes his last, and he says, it is finished, and he gives up his spirit. So maybe the story, maybe the reason he had to die is found somewhere earlier in the day. So let's go back to before Jesus was crucified, and Jesus is in the garden. And Judas shows up, and he goes to Jesus, and he tells those that are with him, he has the temple guard with him, and he goes to them, and he says, listen, the one that I go to, and I kiss him on the cheek, he is the one. And he walks into the garden, and he goes straight to Jesus, and he greets him, and he kisses him. The ultimate betrayal. And they come in, and they arrest. This is Matthew's account. It says, then the men stepped forward, seizing Jesus, and arrested him. With that, one of Jesus' companions, and John tells us it's Peter. That's John lets us know who it is. Matthew doesn't tell us who it is. It says, with that, one of Jesus' companions reached for his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. But put the sword back in its place, Jesus said. For all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Do you think I cannot call on my Father, and he will once at my disposal give me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen this way? Jesus is looking at Peter and saying, I could stop this at any moment. I know you think this is out of control. I know you think that others have the control. But the reality is that I have the control. And if I step into this and I stop this event, then that which it is that needs to happen can't happen. John, who is an eyewitness, he tells us that Jesus said something else that's rather interesting. He looks at Peter and he says, shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me? I want you to remember that. So the temple guards arrest Jesus, and they bring Jesus to the Sanhedrin, which is the similar to the Jewish Supreme Court. And they begin to question him. They begin to interrogate him. They begin to ask these intense questions, which bring us to the place, did Jesus have to die because he was a threat to the Jews, to the Jewish leadership? Now, in reality, there was partly there, right? I mean, part of the reason that Jesus had to die was because of the fact that the Jewish leadership understood. They looked and they said, listen, if we could get rid of this man, then all of his popularity would begin to disperse, and people would stop looking to him and stop following him, and they would come to us, our rightful place. So somehow, some way, we have to get rid of Jesus. But they have a problem. See, part of the problem is that in some way, they have to convince Rome to crucify him, because they can't do this. They want to get rid of Jesus. They want to kill Jesus, but they have no authority to kill Jesus. So they have to come up with some sort of charges. They have to convince Pilate that he's an enemy of the state. But here's the problem with that. You can't just convince Pilate that he's an enemy of the state. Because if you do that, then all of the people are going to be excited about this, because that's what they're looking for. They're looking for a king. They're looking for a Messiah. They're looking for a deliverer. All of this time, they've been wondering, when is the one going to show up who's going to rally us all together, and we're going to go against Rome, and we're going to finally win. So if they go out to the people and they say, this man is against Rome, then all of the people go, we know. So they can't do it that way. They have to be smart. So they have to come up with some reason as to why Jesus would be evil in the eyes of the Jews. So they begin to come up with some plans and with some ideas, and this is what Matthew says. It says the chief priest and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death, but they didn't find any, though many false witnesses came forward. Finally, 2 came forward and declared, this fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days, which was a terrible thing. We read something like that and we think, so what's the big deal about that? Who cares if you could go down and you talk about some church building, or you talk about some Capitol building, and you say, I can destroy this and in 3 days I'll build it again. Everyone would go, you're nuts. Who cares? But to speak against God's temple, there was a law against that. You could not do that. To swear by the temple, to speak against the temple would be horrible. Verse 62, then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you? But Jesus remained silent. And if you stop there, if Jesus could have just stopped. Listen, in the garden when he was being attacked or being arrested, Jesus said, at any moment I could call my Father, and my Father would give me the angels that I need in order to stop this thing. And again, here in this trial, if Jesus would have just been quiet, he could have stopped it, because they had nothing on him. But listen to this. The high priest said to him, I charge you under oath by the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God. And listen to this. He says, you have said so. Which is basically, that's benign as well. That's not a big deal. You say it. That's all he's saying. But then he seals his fate. Listen to this. He says, but I say to you all, from now on, you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming in the clouds of heaven. Now, as you read that, there's a part of us that think to ourselves, so what's the big deal with even that? Well, I'm telling you what the big deal is. The big deal is that Jesus was saying, not only am I from God, I'm equal with God. I will stand within the power of God. To stand at the right hand, or to sit at the right hand of anyone, of a king, is to sit within the authority of that king. And then to use the moniker, the Son of Man. If you go into the Old Testament, you see time and time again, this was God intervening, God being there in the midst of the people. So Jesus stood before them and said, I am he. Verse 65, then the high priest tore his clothes and said, he has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses? Look, now you have heard his blasphemy. What do you think? He is worthy of death, they answered. Then they spit in his face and they struck him with their fists. Others slapped him and said, prophesy to us, Messiah, who hit you? So this trial goes from a trial to a riot. And everybody is convinced, at least those that are there in the middle of the night, in this wee early hours, are convinced he's blasphemous. He's made himself equal with God. They say nothing about how it is that he came to overturn Rome because they know that they would have lost them, but they talk about how he's usurping the authority of the one true God. And now is where it gets tricky, because they've convinced the people, right? They've convinced the Jews, the people who they were going to need to have on their side. They convinced them that he is blasphemous. But now they need to turn the corner and they need to convince Pilate that Jesus is worthy of death. Because if they don't, they can lose the crowd. Listen to this. So they go to Pilate. And this is interesting. I'm not going to read you this part, but I encourage you to go and read it. It's found in John chapter 18. They show up at Pilate, and they go up to the palace, but they refuse to go into the palace. And the reason that they refuse to go into the palace is because if they go into the palace, then they will be considered unclean, which means that it's the Passover time, and they can't have the Passover meal if we go into the palace. So what we're going to do is we're going to stand on the outside, and we're going to holler for Pilate to come out. And finally, Pilate comes out. John 18, verse 29. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" And I love this. Listen to this. "If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you. Just trust us. Just trust us. He's a bad guy." Luke says that they go a little bit further. The religious leaders began to accuse him, saying, "We have found this man subverting our nations." And listen to this. "He opposes the payment of taxes to Caesar." We love giving Caesar our taxes, Pilate. We do. We love it. And this guy doesn't want us to do it. He stands in the way and stops us from doing it. And he claims to be a Messiah, to be the Messiah, a king. And Pilate wants nothing to do with this man. He brings Jesus into his palace. He questions him and he asks him things. And Jesus refuses to say anything. But what he's looking at is he looks at the evidence that comes forward. And he's looking at Jesus and he says, "I see nothing wrong with him." So he goes back out to the religious leaders and he says, "There's nothing wrong with this man." And the religious leaders continue to accuse, and then they let it slip that Jesus is from Galilee. And Pilate says, "I think I've got it. I can get out from underneath this. I don't want anything to do with him." So what he does is he says, "Then send him off to Herod. If he's from Galilee, Herod, that's his territory. Send him off to Herod." So he goes off to Herod. Well, Herod sees what Pilate's doing. He said, No, you're not doing this to me, buddy. I'm not getting in the middle of this Jewish skirmish. There's not a chance. So Herod questions him a little bit, and then he sends him back to Pilate. Pilate sees him coming, and I think at that point, according to the scripture, Pilate begins to think, "Hey, how can I fix this? How can I make this right?" He doesn't want to do anything to Jesus. And he remembers, wait, I release a prisoner during Passover. That's what I'll do. I'll release a prisoner. So he goes and he gathers the most notorious prisoner that he has, Barabbas, out of the dungeons and brings him up. And he stands both Jesus and Barabbas before the people. And he says, Mark 15, so Pilate spoke to them. "Then what do you want me to do with the one you call Christ?" "Oh, no, that's not what I want." He says, "Which one do you want me to release?" And he hears one voice, and then he hears another, and then he hears another as they begin to scream, "Barabbas, give us Barabbas." And then Mark says, so Pilate spoke to them again. "Then what do you want me to do with the one you call Christ, King of the Jews?" And they all shouted back, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate doesn't want to do this. So he takes Jesus and he has him flogged. He has him literally beaten within an inch of his life. These Roman soldiers were so good at this. They knew how to bring people right to the brink of death and then let up. And that's what they did. And afterwards, the Roman soldiers gathered around him and they put a purple robe around him and they put a crown of thorns on his head. And they began to kick him and spit at him. They began to hit him. And then Pilate once again brings Jesus out to the crowd. His hope is that they have softened, that if they see a beaten Jesus, that they'll say, he suffered enough. John 19. So Jesus came outside wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and Pilate said to them, look, here is the man. But when the chief priests and officers saw him, they shouted, crucify him! Crucify him! But Pilate answered, you take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him. The Jewish leaders insisted, we have a law, and according to that law, he must die, because he claimed to be the Son of God. When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside the palace. Where do you come from, he said. But Jesus gave him no answer. Do you refuse to speak to me, Pilate said. Do you realize that I have the power to either free you or crucify you? And Jesus answered, you would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over is guilty of a greater sin. From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jewish leaders kept shouting, if you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be the king opposes Caesar. At this point, Jesus' fate was sealed. Pilate couldn't afford to go against Caesar. Pilate couldn't afford to say, you know what, I think I'll let him go, because if it makes its way back to Caesar, that Pilate had let an insurrectionist go, there's no way that Pilate would ever survive. So the question comes, why did Jesus have to die? Was it really because he was a threat to the Jews and to the Romans? See, I don't think that's the reason. I think the reason is found within what we read. But too often we read this and we think, well, it must be because the Romans wanted him dead or because the Jews wanted him dead. Really, if you need to know, or if you want to know, we need to turn back a little bit further. Let's go back to the beginning of Friday. Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's with his disciples. Matthew chapter 26, verse 36. Listen to this. Then Jesus went with his disciples to the place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, sit here while I go over there and pray. And he took Peter and two sons of Zebedee along with him. Now, I just want to stop here for a second, because time and time again throughout the scripture, every time that Jesus would say, listen, I'm going to go away, I'm going to go up into the hills and I'm going to pray. In other words, there were moments and times when he disconnected away from the world, from all of the things, all the chaos that is, and he would go away to be just with the Father. But in this moment, and this is so odd for me, he says, I want you to stay here, but then he takes 3 with him. And those 3 that go with him, he wants them to be close to him because something is amiss. It says, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. Now think about that. Listen to what Jesus says. It says that he began to be sorrowful and troubled. And then he says, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. What has shaken the unshakable God? Think about that for a moment. This is Jesus. This is God in a bod. This is God in the flesh walking amongst us. And he enters into this moment, this time. He walks into the Garden of Gethsemane and he begins to be overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. What has him so troubled? Listen to what he says. Verse 39. Going a little farther, he fell on his face, or he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will. And then he gets up and he goes back out and he checks on his disciples because he needs them. I need you to be there for me. And they're asleep. And he wakes them and he begs them, please, stay awake with me. Stay with me in this. And he goes back in and he prays again. It says he went in a second time and prayed, my Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, in other words, if this is the only way to accomplish what it is that we need to accomplish, may your will be done. What is the cup? What's in the cup? It's obvious that this is the thing that has Jesus so worried, so overwhelmed, so entrenched to the place of this sorrow. What is in the cup? Well, if you go back to Isaiah chapter 51, and then also if you look in Ezekiel, there are two places where God talks about a cup. And he talks about the fact that the Israelites are going to have to drink this cup. And in both times, the cup is carrying God's wrath. God's wrath. His punishment for sin. Now we don't like that, right? I mean, in Western world, there's very seldom, or there are times that we talk about God's punishment of sin. Very seldom do we talk about a God of wrath. We like the God of love, right? Last week, Nick was talking about the priestly God and the priestly, and then the prophet, and talking about the fact that here is this one who comes and condemns or pokes at sin or points out sin and makes us feel terrible and horrible. And yet there is this other who shows up who is full of grace. And most of us want to live within the realm of the God of grace, the God of love. But here's what we forget. See, we think, no, God's not a God of wrath. That's that God that those other preachers preach about. I didn't know I went to a church where they're going to talk about wrath. But here's the thing that we misunderstand. You can have love and anger at the same time. As a matter of fact, just stay with me here. Please stay with me. Don't disconnect. Don't say, that's it. I'm tired of listening to this pastor. I thought he was different than he is. Just for a moment, I want you to track what I'm about to say to you. Whenever you love someone, isn't it true? When you love someone and somebody else hurts them, doesn't that make you upset? Doesn't it? Come on, your kids, your spouse, your friends. Whenever you love someone and somebody else harms them, it makes you angry inside. You get upset about the fact that how dare you? How could you do that? You want to go after them, right? As a matter of fact, when you love someone and that someone hurts themselves, you get upset at them. Do you not? When they make those decisions, I mean, for me, watching my kids grow up, right? When they were little, it was easy because I made most of their decisions for them. I said, no, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, you're going to do this. And even in those moments and those times whenever I kind of said, okay, because I read the parent books, and it talked about, you need to give them 2 decisions so that they can learn how to make good decisions and stuff like that. And when they kind of made the decision that I didn't want them to make, I somehow helped them to kind of see that we need to somehow come to this decision. But as they get older, and they get to that place, and they start to make those decisions, and you're watching it, you're going, oh my goodness, what are you doing? You could harm yourself. And then as they get a little bit older and they do things that this can hurt you. And you even tell them, this can hurt. This could be one of those things that aren't recoverable. And they do it. And you get angry inside. You get upset inside. That's what God does. And the deeper you love, isn't it true? The deeper you love, the more upset you get. N.T. Wright, theologian, he wrote this. He says, your senses of love and justice are activated together, not in opposition from one another. In other words, when you love someone, you get angry. And when someone harms your beloved, then you're really upset. I call it the mama bear syndrome, right? But the thing is that it's not just the mamas that get upset, right? It's the daddies and the uncles and the brothers. I remember one time I was out and I was messing around with I had my little brother with me and I had my best friend and we were playing and we were having a good time. And because I'm the big brother, I picked on my little brother. I picked on him mercilessly. That's just kind of what I did. It was just one of those things that I did as a big brother. And then I remember there was this point where my friend started to pick on my brother. And I said, what are you doing? he says, what do you mean? And he pushed him down. And that was it. I lost it. I chased him for like a block and a half. He was lucky. He was faster than I was because I was upset inside. When someone hurts the one that you love, you get angry. And here's the thing. You, over the years, have done things to harm others. You have done things to harm you. And because God loves you with such an intense love, he's upset with your actions. And because he's both loving and just, then the things you have done must be punished. And somebody has to pay. And the punishment for sin, hear me say this, the punishment for sin is separation from the God of all love. But here's the incredible thing, and I love this. And I know, because I feel it, and I know I've heard some of you say it. There's this thing inside of us that says, but why doesn't God just turn the other cheek? Why doesn't he just turn away and say, I see what you've done, but I'm going to act like you haven't done it, and I'm going to love you anyway. And here's the thing is that he loves you, and because he loves you, there's this just part where he must punish you. But because he loves you so much, not only must he punish your sin, but he made the decision to take your punishment. That's the gospel, folks. That's the good news. There is this place where sin is punished, but the whole reason that Jesus came was to take the punishment. In an unexplainable way. And I wish that I could explain it, but I can't gather it around my head. And somehow, some way, God takes flesh. He lives amongst us. He goes to the cross. He takes your penalty. I can't even fathom what that is. Not only is it embracing sin, the thing that he hates the most, but there is this sense, this place of separation from perfect love. I can't explain that. And yet that's what happens on the cross. And when Jesus is there in the garden, and he is shaken by the event that is about to take place, this is it. It is the fact that I am about to bear the punishment the world. Jesus took what you are due so that you could take what he is due. Isn't that amazing? You say, well, what's he do? He's the Son of God. He's the King of Kings, the one who sits on the throne. And the moment that you come to know him, the moment that you surrender your life to him, you are elevated to the point of being a child of the King. It's amazing. See, when you see things in light of that, that's why Jesus came to die. You say, why did he have to come? It's because his love could do nothing less. His love, when he looked at you, when he saw you, when he cared about you, you were of such great value that he gave his life for you. That for me, that it changes the entire story, right? Everything that happened there on Friday. When Jesus is there in the garden, and Judas shows up and kisses him on the cheek, and Peter reaches out and grabs the sword, and he takes the ear off of the slaves, or takes the slave's ear off. And Peter says, no, or Jesus says, no, put that away. We're not going to do it that way. That's not how we're handling this. We're not fighting the fight the way that everybody else fights the fight. Do you not understand that at any given moment I could call down the Father's angels and we could settle this thing right now? But that's not the way we're going to accomplish what we need to accomplish. And then he looks at Peter and he says, should I not drink the cup that is before me? See, all throughout the story, it's sprinkled. Why did he have to die? He goes and he stands before Pilate. And he's being accused. And then Pilate comes in and talks with him and says, listen, if you'll just talk to me, if you'll just speak to me, if you'll just have this conversation, I think I can fix this thing. And Jesus chooses to say nothing until Pilate says, do you not understand? I have the power to take your life. And Jesus looks at him and says, you have nothing that hasn't been given to you. Do you see how it's all different now? When he's on the cross and he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? He was forsaken so that you would never have to be. Why did Jesus die? Because his love could do nothing less. Nothing less. Now here's the thing, listen. I know, and I'm looking out here, and for the most part, I know most of you, and I know most of your story, and I get that. And for some of us, I think I just want to approach this from maybe a little different direction. For some of us, you have been believers, and you have been believers for a long time, and you have walked with Christ, and you have experienced this deep relationship with him. And at this moment, at this time, there is something that is amiss. And for me, most of the time, when I get Jesus mixed up, when I forget why he came, I fail to see how great and how much he loves me. It's in adjusting that, it's in getting my focus correct, that all of a sudden the relationship gets fixed. So today I'm going to invite you to do that. I'm going to invite you to just say, Lord, I am so sorry. I am so sorry that I have made you a good teacher in my life. Right? Because it's possible to do that, is it not? Is it not possible to be a follower of Christ and to get to the place to where all you do is you read the things that he says that we ought to do and you say, okay, I'll do them. And you try your hardest to be the best good person, good Christian you can be. And yet the invitation is so much more than that. It is an invitation to see his absolute, complete love for you. And the fact that you have been elevated beyond just being a good person to being a child of the King. And then there are some of you that are here today that for the first time it's clicked. For the first time, you went, oh my goodness, I didn't know that's why he came. I had no idea that he died for me in that way. That he took my burden, he took my sin. I'm going to invite you today to ask him to be your Savior. Would you do that? Maybe you're like I was, and I can remember, I prayed the prayer when I was 17, and then somewhere along the way, man, I wasn't sure, and I said, God, I don't know. I just want to settle this thing. And maybe that's where you're at today. Maybe you're at that place where you thought, I prayed it, but today I want to settle it. Would you do that? So I'm going to invite you to pray with me, okay? You don't have to pray my words. I'll give you kind of a template, but just let your heart call out to God. You speak with him. Heavenly Father, God, I have messed things up. Lord, I keep taking the control back. I keep thinking I can do it. I keep thinking I know what's best. Lord, I desperately need you. I need your love. God, please forgive me of my sin. Oh, Lord, cleanse my heart. I have so much junk that is piled up. Cleanse my heart, Lord. Lord, come into my life. Be Lord of my life. Lord, help me to remember that I am so much more than a good person, but I'm a child of the King. Please, God. For Lord, I ask this in your precious name. Amen. Now listen, if you prayed that prayer, would you take out your connection card? That's the little green card that is inside of your bulletin there. If you'll take that out for me, and then on the back side, there's a place where it says something about the fact that you are accepting Jesus, or you're going to follow through with him, whatever. Would you just let me know? Please let me know. Put your name on the front. Just let me know that that's a decision I made. I would love to help you to take those next steps. So make sure you do that. Give it to me on your way out, or you can place it into the offering can back there in the back. But please let me know. Thank you, guys.
On Friday a thief, on Sunday a king, lay down in grief, but woke with the keys of hell on that day, firstborn of the slain. The man Jesus Christ laid death in his grave. On Friday a thief, on Sunday a king, laid down in grief, but woke with the keys of hell on that day, firstborn of the slain. The man Jesus Christ laid death in his grave. He has cheated and hell and seated us above the fold. In desperate places he paid one time, once and for all. And he has cheated and hell and seated us above the fold. Desperate places, paid on our wages, one time, once and for all. Oh, 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 oh. On Friday a thief, on Sunday a king, laid down in grief, but woke with the keys of hell on that day, firstborn of the slain. The man Jesus Christ laid death in his grave. Hey guys, Have a great week as we get ready for this Easter coming up. I think the official word is you are all dismissed. Have a great, wonderful week.